Hi, welcome. This video will show you how to find the side of a right triangle using trig ratios. The trig ratios that we're going to focus on are sine, cosine, and tangent. And I've written down 3 steps, which you may want to pause this video for and write them down yourself because they're only going to appear on this slide. I do have a handful of other videos that break down this sort of a process or just trig in general. Even something down as far as like how to just simply label a triangle given a reference angle. So you can look for those on my channel if you need a little more help. This video wouldn't be for someone who has had no exposure to trig at all. I wouldn't start with this video. This is probably after you get used to what sine is, what cosine is, what tangent is. That would be your best bet. So, all right, I have written down also the mnemonic device that we tend to use for right triangle trigs. SOHCAHTOA is the norm, and you'll see in a minute how we use it to figure out which trig function to use. Do we use sine in a certain problem? Do we use cosine in a certain problem? Or do we use tangent? So, all right, let's go through the 3 steps. The first step says to identify the reference angle. The first thing I'll say is that we're doing right triangle trig here, and this is your symbol for the right angle, and that will never be our reference angle, so don't worry about that. The reference angle would be some other angle that's indicated in that triangle. So in this case, here's our reference angle. I encourage my students to circle it because it kind of just makes it pop out, and you don't have to kind of carry it in your head where it is. It's just right there. We've circled it. We've identified it. Step 2, we want to label the hypotenuse, opposite, and adjacent sides. And those are sides that we find based on what the reference angle is. And again, like I said, I do have a video just on how to label a triangle. So if this doesn't make any sense or I go too fast, go back and look at that video. So our hypotenuse is always opposite the right angle. So we're going to label that with an H. The opposite side is opposite the reference angle, so we're going to label that O. And then the third side that we haven't labeled is our adjacent side. I always wait and label that one last. It's the one that's next to the reference angle, but sometimes it's not as clear. So I always wait and put the adjacent as the last remaining side. All right, step 3, choose the correct trig ratio based on the given information. So we have written O, H, and A. We've circled a reference angle, but before we touched this triangle, what did we have? What did they give us? So we're going to just kind of look at that. We had an adjacent side, which was 14, and we had a side X that was an O, our opposite side. So we have A and O. So our trig function that we're going to use, or we're going to choose to use, has to have O and A in it. So if I look at this, SOHCAHTOA uses opposite and hypotenuse, so that will not help us. Cosine uses adjacent and hypotenuse, that will also not help us, but this is the one that we want because it has the opposite and the adjacent there. Okay, what we want to do is start with the definition of what tangent is. So the tangent of an angle is the opposite over the adjacent. Again, this is a mnemonic device. It doesn't have the fractions in it the way that I've written it. So we have to remember that our definitions have fractions. Now that I've written the general definition for tangent, I'm going to plug in what this triangle had for us. It gave us a whole bunch of numbers. So did it give us the angle measure? Yes, it did. It told us that the angle is 19. Copying the equal sign, copying the fraction bar, our opposite is x, our adjacent is 14. All right, so our goal now that we have an equation is to get the x by itself. Before I do that, I'm going to get the tangent of 19. That is just a decimal or a number that is stored in our calculator. It is a ratio. So I am going to grab my calculator. And some calculators you have to type the 19 in first and then hit tangent, but most of them these days you just hit tangent 19 and enter. So this here is 0.3443. The norm for this, the normal thing is to carry it 4 decimal places as you do the problem. It might ask you to round at the end of the problem, like round your answer to the nearest tenth or whatnot, but the normal thing to do is to carry it 4 decimal places as you go and do the problem itself. All right, so our problem has changed just slightly. We still have an x over 14, and our goal is to get the x by itself. In order to do that, we have to remove the 14. The 14 is dividing, so to undo division, we are going to multiply it. And this is how we show the work. Over here, we say, all right, We're multiplying by 14, which cancels out. And then over here, we also have to multiply that by 14. So 0.3443 times 14, we're going to get 4. Sorry, I think I did that wrong because I should be getting a larger number. 0.3443 times 14, 4.82 equals x. And what was our x? That was our opposite side. So that is exactly what we want to do. Actually, I was thinking we had to get the hypotenuse. That's why I thought I was incorrect. And then we don't have units. I was going to say we have to make sure we include the units, but we don't have them, so we are good to go. Let's try another problem. All right, with this problem here, we are going to follow the 3 steps once again. And let's just start off by identifying the reference angle. It's going to be 18. Then we need to label the sides. We label the hypotenuse first. It's opposite the right angle. We label the opposite side next. That's opposite the reference angle. And our third side is the adjacent. And our next step before we can set up the equation is to choose the correct trig function. So let's look at what the problem gave us. The problem said we have an adjacent, which is 19, and an opposite, which is x. So we're going to pick the trig function that has O and A in it. So does not have O and A. Cosine does not have O and A. So we are going to use tangent. So again, start with the equation. Tangent of an angle equals opposite over adjacent. And then we plug in the actual numbers that will work for this problem. So we know that our angle is 18 degrees. Our opposite we have labeled as x, and the adjacent we have labeled as 19. That's another reason why I label them. I just have to go back and look at it. I don't have to reprocess again. Which one was my opposite? I just look at the picture, I've labeled them. So it makes it a lot easier. So again, the first step to do would be to grab your calculator and find out what the tangent of 18 is. And it is 0.3249 equals x over 19. Again, I tend to rewrite the problem as I go. To solve for x, the 19 is dividing into it. So we're going to undo that by multiplying. If you're asked to show your work, show that. Come over here and show that I need to multiply 19. And that will give me 6.17. So we'll just say 6.2 equals x. If we go back up and look at the problem, this is x. It is not our hypotenuse. If it was our hypotenuse, I would need a number bigger than 19 because the hypotenuse is always the biggest side. So we get a number that's smaller than 19. It's not bigger than 19. It's not a great check, but it is kind of one way to kind of make sure that our answer fits in the right realm or so. Let's try another. All right, there's 2 more now. If you feel like you're getting the hang of it, you're welcome to copy these problems down, hit pause, solve them yourself, and then come back and hit play and see if you get the right answers. Otherwise, I'm just going to go right through them. Again, top triangle here, reference angle is there. We're labeling the triangles. We have the hypotenuse. We have the opposite. That means we have the adjacent down here. To pick the correct trig function, we need to figure out what we have. We were given an x, which is the opposite, and a 10, which is the hypotenuse. So we need a trig function that uses O and H, and it's the very first one. So the sine of an angle equals opposite over hypotenuse. Then we plug in what we know from the triangle we were given. The angle was 61. The opposite, I have it labeled as x, and the hypotenuse we have labeled as 10. Hopefully this is starting to feel a little bit, I guess, routine. We get the sine of 61 first. 0.8746 equals x over 10. To solve for x, we need to undo that division. So we're going to multiply both sides by 10, showing your work that way. We need to multiply that by 10, so x is going to equal 8.74, so we will just say 8.7. And if we go back up here, find out where x is here. It is, let's see, we got 8.7, which is smaller than the hypotenuse, so that's a reasonable answer. All right, last problem. We're going to go through the same steps. Again, I feel like if it's something new, a topic that's new to you, just kind of following the same steps until you kind of get a grasp of it, it's a little bit better. First step is the reference angle. Second step is to label. And let's see, that's our hypotenuse. We have an opposite. That means that is the adjacent. We need to take a look and see what trig function makes sense. We have the 15, which was our hypotenuse, and x, which is our adjacent. So we need the trig function that uses a and h. That's the one we want. So again, start with the definition of cosine. Cosine of an angle is the adjacent over the hypotenuse. Then we plug in our values. Let's see. So we have the angle is 59. That's going to equal the adjacent over the hypotenuse. And then we are going to get the cosine of 59 out of the calculator. That turns into 0.5150. We want to get the x by itself, so to undo that division, we are going to multiply both sides by 15. Lots of 5's in this problem. And then when we do that, we end up getting 7.73. So I am just going to say 7.7 equals x. And let's just kind of take a peek. That was our adjacent side. 7.7 is smaller than 15, which is our hypotenuse, so it's a reasonable answer. Again, I hope that this helped. Again, this video is not for someone who has not gotten used to trig. Trig can be a little confusing because you get there's so many decimals, scary long decimals until you get used to it. And then the SOHCAHTOA, what are sine, cosine, and tangent, kind of you have to build your way up to it. You can't just dive into a problem like this if you haven't seen it before. So feel free to look through my channel. If you are really confused, you can look back. I'm sure there's trig videos that will help you kind of work your way back this way. All right, I hope this helped.